Okay, so we are back with chapter 12 of Hebrews. Before we start, I'm assuming not, but are there any questions or thoughts? We really haven't done a lot of just general recap. Are there any things that you guys want to talk about what we've gone through so far? Any questions or just general thoughts about the book, the letter?
I've definitely enjoyed it.
Me too.
Yes. Yeah, and you've been very thorough with the teaching as far as when we're in it, digging into it. So it really doesn't leave anything. Well, there's always time, you can always go back and get more out of it. But for the purpose of this and the study, it's been pretty comprehensive, I think.
Good. That's good to hear. Glad. Okay, so let's look at chapter 12. I wanted to start back. Oh, this fell out of my Bible. That's sad. I wanted to start at the end of chapter 11, and if somebody would read verses 32 all the way to 40, so that last couple paragraphs.
I can do that.
Okay.
And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that we should not be made perfect that they should not be made perfect apart from us.
Awesome. So going into chapter 12, we want to hold on to this idea that there were all these people who did these really incredible, acts of faith, that they lived through things that were amazing, and yet there at the end we see that they're not separate from us. They had to wait for the same salvation that we ultimately were given. And so holding on to that thought that they are of the same salvation we are, we're going to move into chapter 12. If somebody would read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 12.
Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Great. So this in verse 1 saying, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, this ties back to that last verse of chapter 11 saying this idea of being surrounded by these witnesses. It's like we're in the middle of them. We are with them in the same way that they had to wait for the same salvation we were given. We also have to endure trials in the same way that they did. We're all in the same proverbial boat, right? And so the way that the author tells us to to be prepared in the way that these witnesses were, as he tells us to lay aside every weight and sin that ensnares us. That is something we actively have to do. We have to put down the things that hold us back, the things that trip us up, the temptations that we are continually faced with. We have to choose and actively put those things down so that we can remain faithful to or be stay faithful through. There's a word, like there's a thing I'm trying to say and I can't, so we're just going to skip it. And then it tells us to run with endurance that race set before us. And then he kind of hones in on a specific witness that we are comparing ourselves to here, and that witness was Jesus. It's been, I think, a couple chapters since we really last talked a lot about Jesus, but here he's saying to look unto Jesus, the author or the beginner, the first of our faith, as well as the finisher. This is similar to previously we talked about Christ being perfected, which didn't have to do with like 100% of something, but had to do with completion. He completed. And so Christ was the beginning and the completion of our faith. And this says he endured the cross for the joy that was set before him, meaning he wasn't looking at his present trial. He was looking ahead to the joy that was waiting for him. And that allowed him to endure, to hold steadfast to the promises, to the things that he had to do, even though they were hard. And because he was able to hold fast and to endure, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Any thoughts on this section or questions?
I think it points back to his love of us, that he counted it joy that we would be able to be with him in heaven one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like even in the church, we enjoy spending time with each other, but there are also people that we don't necessarily enjoy spending time with. And so it is heartwarming to think that Christ thought of all of us in that way, that he looked forward to that and he enjoyed the thought of being with us so much that he endured all of the things that he did. Okay, so the author has us consider that one aspect of Christ as an example in how he endured and how he stayed faithful. And now he's going to have us consider another way that we can look to Christ as an example for our faith. So if somebody would read verses 3 and 4. Myra, would you do that?
Sure. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are punished by him. Want me to go on and finish that?
Yeah, go ahead.
For whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he punishes every son whom he accepts. Right.
So he's also saying, think about Christ in that he endured the hostility. He endured the same hostility that we endure from sinners. And he's telling us, our experience of that doesn't look the same as Christ's did, but it's the same experience. And he goes on to liken the hostility that Christ experienced and the hostility that we experience to God's chastisement or correction, or what was the word? You said discipline, right?
Mine said discipline, yes.
Discipline, education, all of these ideas, right, these are hard things that we go through, and they inform us. They make us better, stronger, wiser. And so the basically what he's getting at here is, like I said, we look to Christ in the example of how to endure, and we also look to Christ in the example of this this trial is hard, and it also teaches us something, and it's a means through which God teaches us or helps us to grow in endurance or grow in strength. Does that make sense?
So those difficulties are like the punishments, or because it says whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he punishes every son whom he accepts. Is that what we're kind of saying? That
Yes. I
it's
think
difficult.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the difficulties in the things that our trials, the difficulties that we go through, trying to be acceptable. Are those difficulties what our training is?
Yeah, I had a little bit of difficulty kind of understanding this part. And again, I think it's partly because, like I said, my brain is just not all here today. But in talking it over with Grant, it's kind of like we're thinking of chastisement as like punishment, like you did something bad and therefore this is the like retribution kind of thing. And he was thinking of it more like there are things that we have to go through that make us stronger. So like the result of the trial is a betterment, I guess is a way to say that. And so I haven't looked at like the Greek of the words, and I couldn't tell you like what we did with perfection, where we looked at other places in scripture that word is used to kind of get the context of what the word meant. I didn't do that with this word, but that would be a good place to do that, because my first inclination is kind of like you were saying, Myra, like, well, does that mean when we go through these things, this is punishment? And Grant's thought process was different than that. He said he thought it meant something different.
That's not what I meant. I didn't mean that we were punished. I don't think we are punished here. I don't think God punishes us. I think that our actions, sometimes the consequence of them are punishment, but we know those are going to happen. God's already told us that. But I'm thinking here that the discipline in, like when I do something, it's going to take me, in my repetition, I'm going to learn to do it better. So the first time I'm going to do something really stupid and I'm going to say, oh, it's going to come back and hit me in the face, so I do it better. That's kind of what I was thinking, that the disciplines, it's do it again, Myra, and it'll be better. Do it again and it'll be better. Do it again and it'll be better. That's kind of where I was going. It's I don't know how to explain myself, but no, I don't think being punished.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I kind of was thinking it's like he loves us enough that he wants us to get it right. So therefore he is actually showing us by chasing in us that we've gone wrong, that we're in a wrong situation. Otherwise, if he just let it go on, how would we know? We would just keep going on and doing what we're doing and not really do anything to correct our behavior or correct whatever this situation is that where we've gone astray.
Mhm.
And we're trying to grow our faith. So I kind of thought about the fruits of the spirit, add to, add to, add to. So he's wanting us to grow in our faith and in our walk with him. And he's trying to guide us. Yeah, no, let's don't go down this path. Let's go back over here. And I think that may be part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think uh, the reason that it's confusing to me is because the way that the author is tying in verse 3, he says, consider him who endured such hostility, right? Such hostility is kind of saying the same hostility from sinners against himself as what we endure or what those witnesses that we read about endured. And then he goes on to say, we haven't resisted to the same point. And then the next thought is on exhortation and the chastisement. And so when I think about that, Christ's endurance of those things was not a punishment. And I don't even think it was a correction in the way that we're talking about it. And that's what's confusing to me about it, is that we have this comparison here, and then the very next thought is about correction or chastisement. And for me, trying to make sense of what's the connection is where I'm getting a little caught up, because I don't think that you guys are wrong at all. I understanding where you're coming from and what you're saying. I'm just not seeing in my brain the connection from that thought to the previous thought.
Right.
That's
And
where I'm getting confused.
what does that mean? You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin.
Right. And I think what it means is basically you're still alive. You're still going to continue enduring or not, right? We've talked about that choice. That's the way that I take it, because not everybody is going to be put to death for the sake of the faith. I don't think that's what it's saying, but I do think it's saying we're not to the point where you don't have to keep trying. You're going to keep dealing with these things.
You haven't given up yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way I understand it.
well, I just know that a father is not going to, he's not going to punish a child just because he doesn't love them. And a lot of, all punishment is not with a stick.
Mhm.
There are some punishments that say, that's just, you got to do that again. You didn't do it right.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
we have sinned to the point, I mean, we have not sinned to the point that we have shed blood, but we sin, and we're in our strivings against sin.
Mhm.
But we haven't shed blood to keep from doing it, to keep from sinning.
Yeah.
Like Christ did. He didn't sin. He shed his blood and still didn't sin.
Mhm.
We haven't done that.
I would also say this. I don't know. I don't know if this is actually a thought that people have had in history, but I remember, it's a weird thought. I'm sorry. The what's the name of that movie? The Da Vinci Code. And I remember there was a scene in that where there was this, like, I don't know if he's like a Catholic priest or something, but he was struggling with some sin, and then he literally like starts whipping himself. I don't think that's not the point here either. It's not saying that unless you are willing to like harm yourself because you've done something wrong. I don't think that's what it's saying at all. I know, like, there's the in the Sermon on the Mount, it talks about lust, and if your eye would betray you, tear it out. I don't think that's literal. You don't literally, like, that's not the point of what is being said. I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought about that, and I don't know historically if that's a thought process that people have gone down, but in case it is, that's not, I don't think that's the point. Okay, so yeah. Any other thoughts or questions there? We can keep going. this idea of chastisement is not over. We'll keep talking about that. So I will read, let's see. I'm going to back up again. We're going to start at verse 5 and read through verse 9. We'll do that. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom the father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? So again, like Myra was saying, we wouldn't consider chastisement from our earthly parents as a bad thing or a negative thing. We might in the moment, but overarching, that's not what we get from that. We consider it respectful, and we take it and apply it to our lives and learn from it. So in the same way, we would treat this chastisement of God as something to be respected or something honorable, not a negative. Also, verse 8 says, if you're without chastening, of which all have become partakers, which basically is just saying, kind of like we've said already, we're all in the same boat. And if you have experienced this, you are just like the rest of us. And if you haven't, that's something to kind of raise a red flag and say, hey, there may be a reason. Maybe, you need to work on something. Maybe there's something that needs to be fixed, because right now you are not. What's that?
You're not really a son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have to teach your kids. Like, there's no way around that. And if you are not being taught, that means that you're not being parented, if that makes sense.
It's almost like we're talking about faith here. All of this is going back to faith. It's almost like if we don't recognize that we're being disciplined, that we need to be able to recognize that we're being disciplined in order to know that we are God's children. Mm-hmm. So if a sinner he sins and he never feels guilty about a sin, he never tries to correct that sin, he never feels any remorse for anything, that's just proof that he's not a child of God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's not respecting that lesson that's trying to be taught to him.
Right. We have faith that our Father will let us know when we're doing something really wrong. If we're in his word, and we know what the word is, we're going to know when we do something wrong, and we're going to feel that. Mm-hmm. We're going to feel, we might even be embarrassed in some way to show that he's disciplining us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other thoughts, or we want to go on? We're not done with chastising yet. Okay, Paula, would you read verses 10 and 11?
Sure. For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it.
So that last part goes to Myra's point, where it says, it yields peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And that's a choice to recognize what's going on and to apply it. And even though the present is painful, it results in something positive. And the next section is kind of gonna illuminate for us how do we go through the pain in a way that we are applying it to ourselves and growing from it. Let's see. Yeah, verse 10 really kind of reiterates what we were already saying about earthly fathers. So, Julie, would you read verses let's just read 12 and 13.
Okay. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather healed.
Right. So the therefore we talked about is tying back to what was just said. So in this idea of being trained by the chastening, how do we do that? Well, we have to, verse 12, strengthen our hands which hang down and feeble knees. So both of those are saying tiredness. Like if you're tired, your arms are feeble. You don't have the breadth maybe to want to keep going.
Tired and weak.
Yeah, weak.
And weary. Yeah, when you're weary.
And being feeble, even I think of it like when you're sick and you're feeling lethargic and you don't have it in you to do the big things. Like you don't have it in you to go run a marathon if you're feeling sick. And so verse 13 is really kind of showing us how do you do that when you are feeling weak and tired and worn out. And we do that by making for ourselves straight paths for our feet to go on. And so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather healed. And the way that I conceptualize this is when you go through, say, a surgery on your foot, you have to go through physical therapy because you have to walk on it properly for it to heal properly. And if you don't, you will do more damage to what was just operated on, as opposed to healing it to the point that you can use it again. And so in our faith walk, we have to guard our path. We have to make it so that we are not going to stumble, because we're taking the most straightforward, the most clear of brush and clear of anything that can trip us up. We want to make it as simple as we can, so that in the times when our faith is low or our energy is low, we're kind of safeguarded, we're protected, and we will continue and we will use the chastisement for better and not for worse. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next section is also going to kind of bring light to how we hold fast through this. So I don't know, I think it's Myra's turn. Myra, would you read 14 to 17?
Okay. Pursue peace with all people and the holiness without which no one else will see the Lord. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many become defiled, that there be no sexual immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears.
So one of the ways that we make for ourselves a straight path is by having a community, right? And so we pursue peace and holiness, and we are looking out for each other. This says looking carefully lest anyone fall short. And we have to be mindful that we're not letting hard feelings get in the way of our relationships with other Christians. Or it says, by this many become defiled. And then he gives us an example of that in Esau. And so Esau, it would have been really easy if Esau had just had a snack earlier in the day. He probably wouldn't have sold his birthright. And obviously that's not what happened. But in the application to our lives, this is kind of the concept that we're getting at, is you have to make it easy for yourself to make the right choice instead of kind of being willy-nilly about it and like whatever comes up and whatever. That's not the way to handle it, or else you will choose wrong like Esau did. And he went through this trial of being hungry, and instead of letting it make him better, he lost out on his birthright, which is a big deal.
Can somebody else read verse 14? This is the American Standard, New American Standard, and verse 14, because the way I see this paragraph is that, are we kind of responsible? We are responsible. I know we are, but this is kind of calling it out that we are sort of responsible for everybody else too.
Yeah, mine says pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely,
yeah,
that's definitely the point that he's getting at, is it's communal.
Yeah.
Which that kind of goes two ways. On the one hand, like the idea of pursuing peace with all people is about building up the relationship, like making connections with each other. And then also we have this idea, like you're saying, of like watching out for each other, like being responsible for helping each other make the right choices. So it starts with, we have to be responsible for the actual relationship, like having the relationship. And then on the progression of that is that relationship has to be the kind of relationship that you hold each other accountable, which is hard. It's hard being the receiving end of that. It's also hard being the giving end of holding people accountable. Any other questions there?
It just adds to all the other places where it talks about 2 or 3 being stronger than one. That community, always pointing back to that community, the assembly, the church, the family. I mean, all the names of, the kingdom, the church, the family, all invoke community and helping one another. And that's how you stay strong. You surround yourself with other people that are like-minded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and earlier in Hebrews, he says, not forsaking the assembly as some have. And we kind of take that to mean the worship assembly, but it just means in general, it means not forsaking each other and holding each other accountable, being in each other's lives. And I lost my train of thought. That verse goes on to say something else related. Stirring each other up to faith and good works. That's done in community, and you can't do it on your own.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's read. I guess I'll read next. Yeah. I'll read 18 to 21. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. I'm going to keep reading verses 22 to 24. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God and heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. So, kind of like we were talking about before, those witnesses and how they seemed to do these incredible, like, huge things, and we kind of put them on this pedestal, even though we know we shouldn't do that. They also were in a different context. Their representation of God was this like big booming voice and all the fire, and it was scary and not something to take lightly. Not that these things that it talks about for us are things to take lightly, but they're not scary. They're not these like monstrous, heavy things. They're the city of the living God. They're an innumerable company of angels, which the word angel is like a messenger. And so it's people who are there to encourage our faith. We talked about that in chapter 1 and 2. And then there's General Assembly and the Church of the Firstborn. So these are all like, the image coming to my head is like a cushion. Like this is all cushiony in comparison to the show of God that they had in their time. And this should be encouraging to us to look forward to that, because we know all of these things, they're in our lives now, but I don't think we feel them in the same way that we will when we've reached the destination. Any thoughts in this section?
Yeah, don't you think, and I just, by what you were just saying, just came to my mind, and I went back, talking about the cloud of witnesses, the example we have of Jesus Christ, the word that we have written because of Jesus Christ, that we have a lot more responsibility than that great cloud of witnesses had, because they didn't have all this evidence that we do.
Mm-mm.
And I just see this all of a sudden, it just hit me that we're a little more responsible. We have a lot more responsibility, to me.
Yeah.
I see it.
And it's like the first part of that, they're talking about, they were, their vision was of God and justice and his justice. They were, God is a God of holiness and justice, and mercy came with Jesus. Well, I know God also had mercy, but it was like Jesus is the seat of mercy. And it says right here, now all of a sudden it moved into there was a church established under Jesus's works and what he did to give us that mercy, to bring us into that seat of mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like you just can't conceptualize one without the other. And that's where so many people really do go wrong with this, is they can't comprehend the both together. It's like they really want to go heavy in the Old Testament and the firing and the judgments and all of that, or they want to go really heavy in the New Testament and the grace and you can't separate them though, because without the mercy, the grace means nothing. And without the grace, I said that wrong. Without the justice, without the justice, the mercy and grace mean nothing. And without the mercy and grace, the justice is just judgment. And that's not really the right word, but I think you're understanding the concept. It's not the full picture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the witnesses that went before us were held in a place also, because God wanted to impart mercy on them, but mercy had to come through Jesus's act first.
Mm-hmm.
You had to wait for their mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and they were able to receive that. And, you know, we kind of talk about Christ's death retroactively cleansed the people. And I don't think that means that when they were living, like, I don't think it's like until Christ was born and died, they were just not saved. But it was because God works outside of time. For him, like, Christ's death had happened and was covering them. I don't know if that makes sense. And that's probably another conversation for another day.
Right.
But yeah, it all works together. Okay, who would like to read? Let's do verses 25 to 27.
I'll do that. See that you do not refuse him who speaks, for if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. One more, right?
Yes.
Now this, yet once more, indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain.
So earlier in previous chapters, we talked about the betterness of Christ's covenant to the earlier covenant, and how the earlier covenant was like a shadow of what the real thing was and all of that. And so he's saying here, we need to be mindful that those in the earlier, like in the Old Testament, if they were held accountable to the voice that boomed only on the mountain, how much more are we accountable to the voice that covers all of the earth? It's not just Mount Zion. It's not, Mount Sinai. It's not just in that place and time. It speaks to all. And it's that comparison of, under the old law, there was the temple, and it was a very much finite place. And there were things that happened in that place and time. And now we don't have that in the same way. I don't know if that makes sense. What are your thoughts?
I guess I was thinking of, that God made a covenant with Abraham and laid down, these are the things you need to do, but the sacrifices and all of those went away. And so this is when he's saying that he shook the earth, and now says, this is what you're going to do from this point on, that these will be what stays in place as far as receiving Jesus as your sacrifice, that this was the sacrifice that would remain.
It's kind of too like it's not exactly that it's not exactly like they had a different law, like completely, but we don't follow the like specifics. There's the underlying principles that we still follow, right? And so you had this shaking, like if you have a tree and it's the end of fall and you're trying to get rid of the leaves, you shake it off and then you've got just the branch left. It's kind of the picture that I get in my head, is like there were these leaves, so to speak, of the law, that they were not the law. They were fabrications of the law. They were like, I don't know the word, like parts of the law, or like
maybe a discipline of the law.
Disciplines, examples, like tangibles of the law. And what remains is not necessarily the tangibles, but it's the law. It's the heavenly behind the scenes, like the principles. Does that make sense? The
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I don't know, my brain. Trying. But that's what I'm seeing is like there's the tangible and the intangible, and the tangible gets shaken off. We read about the chaff on wheat, and it blows off in the wind. That's the concept that there was a whole thing, and then part of it gets shaken off, and then you've got the real, like the part that you're wanting.
And I thought about the literal times he shook the earth, like when they talked about up here at Sinai, when the when the earth shook, and when Christ died, and the earthquakes and the ripping of the veil, and you think about the once more when he's going to shake the earth, the earth's going to be gone. There will be nothing left that was made, and that will include the heavens of the earth, so that only heaven will remain.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken. So he's saying we're gonna do this once more, and that's gonna be that.
But yet,
Yeah. Yes.
the
Would
last chance.
Yeah, exactly. Any other thoughts, or do we want to read the last couple verses? Julie, would you read 28 and 29?
Sure. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For God is a consuming fire. For our God is a consuming fire.
Awesome. Yeah, so what do you guys think it means here? It says, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace. What is the contingency there? How do you guys see that?
Well, the grace, to finish it up, it says, may we have grace to serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So it's basically that we don't really know how to worship God unless we go to the word and find out exactly what it is that
He wants.
that opens our hearts to him, to make us desire to find out about him and what it is he desires of us. And that's received by grace, I think.
We have to know what we have to do, and we have to do what we know we have to do to receive God's grace. It is freely offered, but we still have to go back to that working faith. We have to have that faith that obeys to receive the grace.
And then he reminds us that our God is a consuming fire. That's the justice coming back to.
Right. Merging those two back together.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe when I read let us have grace, what I'm thinking is like extending grace, and maybe what it's meaning is receiving grace, knowing that this kingdom can't be shaken. Let us receive the grace that says, even though this unshakable thing you are not living up to, you still have access to it. And because of that, that's how we serve God. Does that make sense? Maybe
Right.
that's kind of what that means by let us have grace.
I see a great breakdown. Yeah.
Kind of a reminder that we don't want to lose this kingdom that can't be shaken. We don't want to be in the part that can be shaken, that's going to go away. We want to be in this kingdom that can't be shaken.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked so many times at this point about how this author really wants you to feel confident in what that salvation is. And this is just a reminder, like you said, this is a reminder of we have to hold fast to this. And part of that may mean understanding where you fall short, but not letting that falling short ruin you or make you turn to the side where you don't belong.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Hmm?
Said, okay.
Yeah.
We're down to one chapter.
One last chapter. Can you believe it? It's only taken us like half a year. I
It
think-
took us as long as it needed to take us so
know.
that we could get all of it out of there.
Definitely. Okay, so I will see you guys